Okay, let's dive into a really big question today. Why do we actually bother being good to each other?
Hmm.
Is it, because someone laid down rules? A sense of duty, maybe?
Or is it something deeper? Maybe even something connected to our own self-interest, oddly enough.
That's a huge question in philosophy, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it was formally posed, actually, back in 1837. The Danish Royal Society of Sciences, they put out a call for a prize essay.
Asking that exact thing. Where does morality come from?
Pretty much asking where its basis should be found.
And that brings us to our subject for this deep dive. Arthur Schopenhauer's entry. Which was pretty controversial, right? And didn't actually win.
Didn't win, no. But it offered this really radical answer for the time. We're looking at the 1903 translation by Arthur Broderick Bullock.
And his answer wasn't about rules or God, was it?
No, it was rooted in a very human feeling. Compassion, mitleid.
Which flew right in the face of the big ethical system back then, Kant's system.
Directly. Schopenhauer spent a lot of time trying to take Kant's ideas apart.
Okay, so our mission here is to unpack Schopenhauer's argument, really see why it was so different, look at the details, the surprising bits.
And figure out why the Royal Society ended up saying no thanks.
Right, so what was this society's question exactly?
Well, they were quite specific, they asked. Should the basis of morals be sought in an innate idea of morality or conscience?
Which sounds very Kantian.
They explicitly linked it to Kant's approach, yeah. Or they asked, should it come from some other source of knowledge, something maybe grounded in experience?
And they weren't just looking for, tips on being virtuous.
No. The text makes it clear they wanted an objectively true basis, something solid.
And they thought this basis had to connect to metaphysics, to a whole explanation of reality.
Exactly. They believed that ultimate truths about the universe, about reality itself, were somehow tied to the ethical meaning of what humans do.
Like, you can't understand one without the other.
Right. They saw philosophy as this interconnected whole. They even quoted Plato, saying you can't really grasp the nature of the soul without understanding the whole picture.
So by asking this, they were basically saying the current answers weren't good enough.
That seems to be the implication. Time for a fresh look.
Okay, so the stage is set. The challenge: find the real source of morality. And then Schopenhauer steps in.
And he starts with this great motto: to preach morality is easy, to found it difficult.
That really captures his goal, doesn't it? He's not here to lecture.
No, he wants to dig down. To find an incontestably efficient moral principle, as he put it, something rooted in actual human nature.
And right off the bat, he rejects the usual places people look. Okay. Abstract reason.
Or the idea that it comes from the individual's will. Because, he argues, the individual will, it's fundamentally geared towards its own well-being.
Egoism.
Egoism, exactly. That's his starting point for human motivation.
Which leads him straight to his main opponent.
Kant. Oh, yes. A huge chunk of the essay is just taking apart Kant's ethics, especially the Grundlegungs or Metaphysik der Sitten.
And he's not gentle about it?
Not at all. He looks at Kant's big ideas. Moral law, duty, obligation.
Right, that says.
He says these are just concepts taken over bodily from theological morals. They're religious ideas in disguise.
Wow. So not derived from pure reason, like Kant claimed.
Schopenhauer argues they only make sense if there's a promise of reward or a threat of punishment, like in religion. He quotes Locke on this.
So talking about absolute obligation or unconditioned duty?
For Schopenhauer, that's just empty words. A contradictio in adjecto, a contradiction in terms, Kant's smuggling in God, basically, without admitting it.
That's a huge accusation, saying Kant's foundation isn't reason, but just repackaged religion.
It's a fundamental challenge, yeah. And then he goes after the categorical imperative itself.
Kant's big tool for deciding morality.
Right. Schopenhauer calls it complex, abstract, and artificial. And remember, Kant claimed we know this a priori, just through reason, with no need for experience or feelings.
And Schopenhauer's problem with that a priori thing
is that anything known purely through reason, a priori, can only deal with the form of thinking or acting, not the content, not the actual substance or essence of what's happening.
Kant even said not to look in human nature or experience.
Which, for Schopenhauer, leaves Kant's whole ethical system just floating, disconnected.
How does he put it?
He calls these pure conceptions a priori, things like simply shells without kernels, or something that floats in the air, incorporeal. If it's not tied to reality, to what actually moves people, what's the point?
Okay, so Kant's system is empty words, maybe borrowed from religion,
Yeah.
floating in the air. That's quite the critique. But then he makes an even sharper point about the categorical imperative, doesn't he?
He does. This is maybe his most damaging point. He argues that even this supposedly pure, rational tool is secretly driven by egoism.
How does that work? The imperative says, act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law.
Schopenhauer zooms in on that phrase, what can I will? Or what can I wish? He says, the only standard you actually use to decide what you can wish for everyone is your own self-interest, your egoism.
So when I imagine a rule becoming universal, I'm really asking, how would I fare in that world?
Exactly. He takes Kant's own examples, like not making false promises or not being indifferent to suffering.
And Kant's reasoning.
Schopenhauer points out that Kant's reasoning often comes down to, well, cases can occur in which a man needs the love and sympathy of others.
Uh-huh. So don't lie, because you might need people to be truthful to you. Don't be indifferent because you might need help someday.
Precisely. It's self-protection. Schopenhauer says this reveals egoism sitting on the judge's seat, scales in hand. It's not pure reason deciding. It's self-interest.
He even links it to the golden rule, right? Do not do unto others.
Yes, quod tibi fieri non vis, alteri ne feturis. He argues Kant's imperative is just a complicated way of saying the golden rule.
And the golden rule itself is also based on
Egoism for Schopenhauer. Because you're primarily considering yourself in the potential victim role. How would I feel?
So anytime self-interest creeps in, even indirectly, it disqualifies the action from being truly moral in his view.
That's his strict criterion. And he really mocks Kant's emphasis on just obeying the abstract law, even when it feels wrong or goes against compassion.
Like when Kant says obedience comes from a sense of duty, not voluntary inclination.
Schopenhauer finds that appalling. What slavish morality, he exclaims, as if morality is just following orders blindly.
And he points out where Kant basically dismisses feelings like compassion.
Yeah, where Kant calls sympathy and compassion actually troublesome because they cloud judgment about these well-weighed maxims. Schopenhauer sees that as revealing how cold and detached Kant's system really is, rules over feelings.
He doesn't stop at Kant either. Fichte gets similar treatment.
Oh, Fichte gets hammered. Schopenhauer calls him a Wissenschaftslehrer, a scientific blank, basically. Accuses him of subtle mystification and claptrap.
Just empty words again.
Pretty much. He ridicules Fichte's convoluted attempts to derive helping others from some abstract duty.
And the idea of human dignity as a foundation.
Schopenhauer just waves it away. Empty, baseless assumption. He's really clearing the ground, sweeping away everything he sees as flawed.
Okay, so if Kant and Fichte and abstract duty and human dignity are all out, where does Schopenhauer tell us to look?
He says, look at experience. Look at the real world. Find actions that we actually recognize as having genuine moral worth.
Like what?
Things like voluntary justice, pure loving kindness, real nobleness. These are the phenomena we need to explain.
And the explanation lies in their motive.
Exactly. Find the peculiar motives behind these actions, and that will be your true basis of morality.
And his test for whether a motive is genuinely moral is?
Super strict. An action only has moral worth if it completely excludes all self-interested, egoistic motives. Any whiff of personal gain and poof, no moral value.
So the value has to come only from focusing on the other person.
Exclusively from considering the weal and woe, the well-being and suffering of another person.
Okay, so what possible motives could make someone act purely for someone else, even against their own interest? What's left?
His answer is surprisingly simple. Compassion. Mislaid.
And for him, compassion isn't just, feeling a bit sorry for someone.
No, it's much more intense. He says when you feel compassion for someone's pain, his weal and woe go straight to my heart, exactly in the same way as otherwise I feel only my own.
Wow. So it breaks down the barrier between me and them.
That's the key. It dissolves that absolute difference we usually feel. And he argues this feeling, this direct identification, is the sole source of genuine justice and true loving kindness.
It's not a rule you follow from reason, but an immediate feeling.
Exactly. An undeniable fact of human consciousness, he calls it. Essential, original, immediate. Doesn't depend on philosophy or religion or being taught. It's just there.
And it's specifically triggered by suffering.
Yes, direct sympathy with another's sufferings. He points out that someone else's happiness often leaves us indifferent. Even our own happiness makes us kind of lazy. But suffering theirs or ours gets our attention. It's the catalyst for compassion.
And from this one feeling, compassion, he derives his main virtues.
2 cardinal virtues, yes. First is justice. Neminem laede. Do harm to no one.
How does that come from compassion?
He sees it as compassion acting negatively. It's the first degree. It sees the potential suffering your actions could cause another person, and it says stop. It restrains your egoism or malice because you feel their potential pain.
So it's not about a social contract. I won't hurt you if you don't hurt me.
No, that would be egoism for him. True justice comes purely from compassion for the other. He calls its origin pure and simple, truly moral.
That's the don't do harm part.
Yeah.
What's the second virtue?
Loving kindness, omnes, quantum potes, juva. Help all people as far as you can.
And this is compassion acting positively.
Yes, the second degree. This is what impels you to take action, to actively help someone who is suffering. It's a clearer expression of compassion's power than mere justice, which is just holding back.
Okay, so justice prevents harm, loving kindness actively helps. Both spring from this direct feeling for the other person.
Right. He does add that reason plays a role in justice, helping us form general principles like do harm to no one and apply them consistently. But the root motive is always compassion.
It's a powerful idea, this direct connection. But he admits there's something unexplained about it.
He calls the process mysterious. How exactly does another person's suffering become my motive, feeling almost like my own? Reason can't fully map it out, he concedes. It seems to lie outside ordinary logic or experience.
But it happens all the time.
Yes, of daily occurrence. He identifies it as the spring of morality, even if its ultimate mechanics remain a bit of a mystery.
This empirical, feeling-based approach also gives him a different take on practical issues, like lying.
Definitely, unlike Kant's absolute ban on lies.
Schopenhauer thinks sometimes it's okay.
Yes, but only as a form of strict self-defense, against unjustifiable questions or someone trying to harm you through malice or violence.
Like lying to a robber, maybe. Or someone prying into your life to hurt you.
Exactly. If telling the truth enables someone else's wrongful, harmful actions, then a lie might be justified to prevent that harm. It's a defense against egoism or malice.
Which is totally different from Kant's view.
Completely. He finds Kant's unqualified and boundless horror of falsehoods to be almost prejudiced, lacking good reasons when weighed against preventing actual harm.
And this focus on preventing harm, on compassion, he doesn't just limit it to humans.
No, absolutely not. This is a really striking part of his work. He forcefully argues that compassion must extend to animals.
He was quite critical of the way animals were treated in the West.
Extremely critical. He blames what he calls the revolting coarseness and barbarism of Western attitudes, partly rooted in Judaism, he thought, for treating animals like mere things, just means to human ends.
Which justifies things like
Vivisection, cruel hunting, whipping working animals. He saw it as a major moral failing.
And his reason for including animals is
the fundamental similarity. He argued the difference between humans and animals is mainly the degree of intelligence due to brain development. It's quantitative, not a fundamental qualitative difference in their being or capacity to suffer.
Did he see any hope for change back then?
He did see some positive signs, yes. He actually praised the English for starting to bring in laws protecting animals. He mentions arrests for dogfighting in 1839.
An organization starting up.
Yes, the London SPCA Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. He mentions them providing extra horses to help pull carts up steep bridges. Also notes similar societies in Philadelphia, Geneva. He felt the moral chord was finally beginning to vibrate on this issue in the West.
And he contrasted this with Eastern traditions.
Right. He pointed to the reverence for animals in Brahmanism and Buddhism, the idea of metempsychosis, reincarnation, stories like Pythagoras buying fish just to set them free.
Does that mean he thought everyone should be vegetarian?
Not necessarily. He makes an interesting point that while compassion extends to animals, human suffering might still be considered greater because of our mental and emotional depth. So eating meat wasn't automatically precluded by compassion in his view, though causing needless suffering clearly was.
Okay, so compassion is the core, extending even to animals. What about conscience? We usually think of conscience as that inner voice telling us right from wrong.
Schopenhauer has a very different, quite unusual take on conscience. It connects to his whole philosophy of the will and character.
It's not an innate moral guide.
No. He says conscience is basically the knowledge we gain about ourselves, specifically about our own unchangeable character by looking back at our actions over time.
So my actions are like a mirror, showing me who I really am.
Exactly. He calls our acts a register or a mirror that reveals our true will, our essential nature, which he believes is fixed.
So that feeling of guilt or satisfaction after doing something.
Is really satisfaction or dissatisfaction with that which we are and are unalterably, irreversibly. It's self-knowledge derived from seeing our character in action.
And he was really firm on character being fixed, immutable.
Absolutely. Virtue is nature's work and cannot be inculcated, he says flatly. Character is an original datum, unchangeable by intellectual correction.
But what about education? Learning, doesn't that change people?
He argues that intellect, knowledge, instruction, they can clarify our understanding. They can show our will better, more logical ways to achieve its existing goals. It can change the path we take.
But not the destination, not the goal itself.
No. The ultimate goal, what our will fundamentally strives for, that's fixed by its original nature. Education fills the head, he says, but the heart, the core will, remains unimproved. We are who we are, Drew Divino, by divine dispensation.
That's quite a deterministic view.
It is, and it contrasts sharply with ideas of moral self-improvement common in other systems.
Now, coming back to the Danish Royal Society, they wanted the moral basis tied to metaphysics, to an explanation of reality. How does Schopenhauer connect compassion to that deeper level?
Okay, first he tackles good and bad. He says these aren't absolute concepts known a priori, they're relative, learned from experience.
Relative to what?
To a desiring will. Good simply means in conformity with the desiring will, and bad means contrary to a desiring will. They describe how things relate to someone's desires, not some objective standard.
And he uses this to contrast the egoist and the good person.
Exactly. The egoist sees this massive gulf, an immeasurable difference between their own ego and everyone else, the non-ego. Others are like phantoms, tools maybe. Their maxim is, periat mundus dum ego salvus sim, let the world perish as long as I'm safe.
But the good person, the compassionate person.
They experience that distinction as much less sharp. In truly generous acts, driven by compassion, that wall between self and others seems to dissolve, almost vanish.
And that feeling, that dissolution of the boundary, is the clue to the metaphysics.
Precisely. This is where he connects it all. He takes Kant's distinction between the world as it appears to us, phenomena, and the underlying reality, the thing in itself. But he goes further.
How so?
He argues that the multitude of separate individuals we see, all the different people, animals, things, that separation is part of the appearance, created by the way our minds structure reality through time and space.
So the separateness isn't ultimately real.
It's an illusion, he argues, borrowing the term Maya, deceptive vision, from Hindu philosophy. The underlying reality, the thing in itself, isn't fragmented. It's a fundamental unity.
Wow. So compassion, that feeling where another's suffering becomes your own,
is actually a direct intuitive glimpse through the veil of Maya. It's the practical felt recognition of that underlying unity. It's the sense which identifies the ego with the non-ego, the feeling that my true inmost being subsists in every living thing.
So morality isn't just a feeling. It's tied to the actual structure of reality.
That's his metaphysical grounding. The compassionate person acts out this truth, while the philosopher might arrive at it through deep thought. He even suggests moral excellence is higher because it directly grasps this unity.
And he points out this isn't a totally new idea.
Not at all. He sees echoes of it in Plato, Spinoza, Christian mystics, but finds its clearest expression in ancient Indian philosophy, Brahmanism, Buddhism. He quotes the Bhagavad Gita. This idea of underlying unity and the illusion of individuality is ancient wisdom, he believes.
What are the implications of living by one view or the other?
For the egoist, trapped in the illusion of separation, it leads to despair, isolation, the feeling that everything ends with their personal death.
And for the compassionate person who recognizes the unity?
A deep inner peace, a sense of kinship with all life, myself once more, trust, and a release from the fear of death as annihilation. Forgiving enemies becomes the ultimate expression of seeing past the illusion of separation.
Okay, so that's the whole argument. Dismantle Kant, ground morality and compassion, extend it to animals, redefine conscience, and link it all to a metaphysics of unity. It's quite a system.
It really is. Comprehensive, bold, and radically different from the prevailing views.
So, after all that, how did the judges at the Danish Royal Society react?
Well, as we know, he didn't get the prize. Their official judgment laid out several reasons why.
Okay, what were they?
First, they simply stated dissatisfaction with the mode of discussion, ipsa disserendi forma. The way he argued.
Which probably relates to his attacks on other philosophers.
Almost certainly. That's another explicit point. They disapproved of the unseemly language he used about certain summi highest philosophers, clearly meaning Hegel and Fichte, whom he treated with contempt. That couldn't have gone down well.
What else? Do they just not buy his core argument?
They said they were unable to see that he actually proved his case. They weren't convinced that compassion, as he presented it, was adequately demonstrated to be the basis of morality.
And did he answer their actual question?
That was a major sticking point. They felt he omitted to deal with the essential part of the question. They wanted an analysis starting from consciousness, conscience, innate ideas, the Kantian framework they suggested. Schopenhauer just dismissed that and offered his own principle instead.
He didn't engage with their starting point.
Right. And finally, that metaphysical connection they wanted, he put it in an appendix, called it opus supererogationis, like extra credit work.
When that connection was exactly what they asked for.
Precisely. They wanted the link between his moral basis, compassion, and his overall metaphysical system, the will, unity, to be central to the argument, not tacked on at the end.
So, summing up their rejection. He was rude, didn't prove his point to their satisfaction, didn't answer the question they asked, and sidelined the crucial metaphysical connection.
That seems to cover their main objections, yes. He offered a brilliant, radical alternative, but it wasn't the answer they were looking for, presented in the way they expected.
So there you have it. Schopenhauer's attempt to found morality, not on abstract rules or duty, but on that very real, very human feeling of compassion.
Which he saw as reflecting a deep truth about the interconnectedness of all life, a truth obscured by the illusion of our separateness.
A powerful vision, even if it didn't win the prize. Maybe it was just too far outside the box for the society, too dismissive of the Kantian tradition they seemed rooted in.
It certainly challenged the foundations they expected him to build upon.
So, listening to this, what does it make you think? If Schopenhauer has a point, if our capacity for compassion is the core of morality, and maybe even tied to a fixed character we're born with, what does that do to our usual ideas about moral responsibility, about self-improvement? Can we really teach someone to be good?
Or perhaps the other way. Does this idea that our true self isn't separate but part of a larger unity glimpsed through compassion offer a different kind of ethical path? Not about following rules, but about recognizing kinship. What does your own conscience, that record of your actions Schopenhauer talks about, tell you about the character it reflects?